Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 99th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our discussion panels twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political discussion. Today, our panel will discuss the First Amendment right of free speech. We will pay special attention to what it means and doesn't mean in our contemporary context. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. On her left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. We'll begin with Bryan. Bryan, our founders thought that our freedom to speak our mind was important enough that they included it in the very first amendment to the Constitution. Even so, the clarity was very strong. They stated that Congress shall pass no law abridging our right to free speech. Even with that, our Supreme Court has been called on 21 times just since 1919 in order to clarify exactly what that means. If that weren't enough, our freedom to voice our opinions continues to be challenged on some college campuses by individuals who claim to have the right to silence those with whom they disagree. What's your thought?
Well, on the last point, that has to stop. Colleges should be a very open forum for a variety of thought. How do you expand and develop and grow your understanding of other beliefs and other opinions? Some of the things that have been happening recently are very disturbing. When this sort of all started probably 5 or 6 years ago, when commencement speakers were invited to come, and then a group of people would get together, whether it was faculty and students or a combination of both, and they would make such a stink about it that they would disinvite that individual, whether it was that individual's political views. Normally their political views, statements that they might have said in their way past were dredged up. So I believe that there is a very limited amount of constriction on free speech. I know one is that you can't threaten people. Mm-hmm. Two is you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. Things like that. There are rules and limitations to it, but the ability for an individual to stand on the street corner and to share their ideas with people, that's classic free speech. And we get into a very, very cloudy and murky area when we start deciding what is hate speech. That's been recent. Howard Dean just recently said that the First Amendment does not cover hate speech. Well, it does. It does. Hate speech, if Patty wants to sit here and call me every which name she wants, as long as she doesn't punch me in the nose, she can do that. And she has a right to. She has a right to her opinion, and I would protect that right. And unfortunately, we're on this slippery slope where if something triggers an individual, or something just doesn't feel right, or something doesn't sync up, or meet their expectation of what they believe in, then you don't have a right to discuss that. And recently, Ann Coulter, I don't particularly care for her. She's pretty much, out there as far as I'm concerned. She was supposed to speak, and they made enough of a problem for her to come that she didn't go.
Well, the university said they couldn't guarantee her safety was
right.
A big problem.
Right. And to me, I think that's a pretty sad day.
Yeah.
That's a pretty sad day. So I'm interested in hearing what maybe some of the solutions might be, because we can't have a small group of people deciding what is acceptable speech, what isn't acceptable speech, what's considered hate speech, a very subjective term, who knows how far this goes. Not that long ago, we had a county commissioner, I believe, out in California subpoena, I think she might have been the mayor or something, she subpoenaed a sermon that a minister gave because she considered that a violation of the city ordinance about this hate speech when it came to the LGBTQ movement. That's got to stop.
What did he do? Read scripture?
He pretty much, he had a sermon. I didn't read the whole thing, but it was verified. It wasn't fake news. She did request his sermon, and she was prepared to, bring charges against him under the ordinance of their town that this was considered hate speech. You couldn't talk about that, even in the setting of a church. That's crazy. Yeah, that's got to stop. I mean, where does, if you let that go, where does it end?
Well, it'd be interesting to know exactly what he said. Mm-hmm. If he said go out and round them all up and beat them to death, that would be.
No, I don't think that was. I don't think that was the. Was in his sermon.
No. Patty, I'll bet you agree 100% with Bryan, don't you?
I actually agree with a lot of what he said. You do mention hate speech. Hate speech can be, I thought, had been ruled that it can be illegal if it meets certain criteria, if it is directed towards certain groups, and I believe it has to promote violence and not just
what they call fighting words.
Yes, not exactly. It's not just that someone may take it and then expand on that idea and then commit violence. But if that person speaking is encouraging, like you said, to go out and round up people, that is.
Yeah, and I think that would fall in the category of a threat.
Yeah.
It would be a threat, and that I would say I would agree that you can't threaten people.
And hate speech has also been defined as at particular groups, particular minorities or groups, whether it be religious, whether it be gender, whether whatever. So in those ways, I think hate speech is wrong. I totally agree with you about Ann Coulter. I do not agree with her at all.
I'm shocked.
I'm sure you are. She had the right to speak. She had been invited. The safety issue, from what I understand, it was not a matter of students on the campus that they were concerned about. It was outside agitators that were going to be coming in, from what I understand, and disrupt it. And if people want to hear Ann Coulter, great. And it's good to hear it. Now, interestingly enough, Ann Coulter got more press. She got more notoriety because of the fact this was occurring. She was on all kinds of...
Sold more books.
Sold more books. She was on media. She got to get her message out there. She continued to say all along, I'm going to go, I'm going to go. They've made these conditions. I'll meet those conditions. And at the last minute, she pulled out of herself. So I don't necessarily fault the university, but I think that for that minority that is out there protesting this and not allowing her to speak, that's what's wrong. And that's against free speech.
Do you agree with Bryan when he said that there's a history here, and that one of the reasons why faculties or administrations back off is that or the students are demonstrating so much is because that they've been successful with it in the past. There have been several people who just backed off.
I'm not sure that a university choosing who to speak at their commencement address and then changing their idea is infringing upon the right of freedom of speech. They have the choice to bring it whoever they want. Liberty University certainly is not going to invite Barack Obama in the near future to give their commencement address, and that is their right as a university to have, because I'm not sure a commencement address should be the political address or should cause, I'm not sure you want all that turmoil involved in it. So I'm not sure that that is limiting free speech. If a group at that university, though, like the Republican Party, would come forth and say, listen, we want to have Michelle Malkin come in and speak, and they should be allowed to do that because that is free speech, and they shouldn't be relegated to some little corner in a building. It should be out where anyone could go to hear that. Free speech, though, then expands to what right does the person in the audience have to heckle then that speaker? Do you have a responsibility to listen to them respectfully, allow them to speak, and then decide on your own how you feel? Or can you stop them from speaking? Is that, if you stop them, is that infringing upon your free speech? We have discussed before, like at campaign rallies, Trump has already started his run for the 2020 election, which is just really unnerving. But at his rally in Pennsylvania, just this past weekend, he had a heckler in the audience, and you couldn't hear what they were saying, but you hear him telling them, "Get him out of here, throw him out." So, is that protected? And I'm not sure.
Ask Ron. I'll bet you he has an opinion about that.
It was interesting. What's going on now? There was a woman at a speak by Pence, by Mike Pence, I think. She gave an involuntary chuckle to the audience, and they're prosecuting her. She's considered to have been a disruptive influence in his speech. They're prosecuting her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's just
Where
happened.
was she, on a panel or something?
No, she was in the audience.
She was in a hearing.
She
It's a
chuckled
congressional
in
hearing.
And she chuckled. She gave one of these kind of things,
Prosecuted.
Okay.
I wonder what the charge is.
Being disruptive of the meeting.
Oh, good Lord.
Breaking the peace, breaching the peace,
I wouldn't be surprised if there was more to it than that. But
Well, it'd be interesting to follow. Well, I'm also appalled by what I perceive to be the lack of civil discord on college campuses, the college students being so close-minded. But I'm interested, too, in the history of this. And for the audience, our moderator usually gives us a list of things, and he found a website that lists in a series of bullet points the various court decisions starting about 1919. I happened to see a couple of weeks ago a program on PBS about the First World War, and there was a tremendous abrogation of civil liberties during that. You couldn't say anything. They passed a Sedition Act. It was illegal to talk against the war, and Eugene V. Debs, the prominent socialist politician, was jailed because he spoke out against the draft. There was a lot of resistance to the draft, which in itself could be
overruled.
It could also be considered something against civil liberties. You have to go to war. And they were jailing people of German descent, similar to what they did to the Japanese in the Second World War, and that's another instance. So it goes back in our history. I don't know, probably well before that as well, no doubt. But the Founding Fathers were certainly right in trying to prevent Congress from stopping that. Hate speech. I'm undecided about hate speech in a way. Hate speech is verbalization of bigotry, and bigotry certainly isn't morally right. But on the other hand, I've mellowed somewhat in recent years. When I was a kid, I used to sing this very racially offensive song that my parents had a recording of about African Americans, and had a little whistling refrain. I used to sing that very happily. And I don't tell Polish jokes anymore, or as Big Chuck and Little John said, certain ethnic jokes.
Oh, that'd trigger a whole group of people.
It's a whole group of people.
Went back and watched Little Chuck.
So I am concerned about the college campus thing, and I think, I think universities have a right to invite people whom they want to, and they should not be influenced by the student body or real outside influences. Now, I think they might have a responsibility to provide physical protection. Somebody like the Ann Coulter case, if there are people out there carrying guns in the audience, which is legal these days in a lot of places.
Not California.
Becoming more so.
Yeah.
Then I think that's a problem. And
as long as we're talking about hate speech, I'm a little bit confused about what it is. And I did a lot of research trying to find out exactly what the law says about hate speech. The best I could come up with is hate speech is speech which attacks a person or group on the basis of attributes such as gender, race, disability, or sexual orientation.
So I say bigotry expressed verbally.
Yes. However, it seems like it's only applied when it concerns groups that are either currently or formerly considered to have been oppressed. As a straight white male, I fit that. You know, we got gender, race, well, gender and race fit there. However, as a straight white male, could I ever bring a charge of hate speech against somebody? I've had some.
It's just so subjective, and it's so hard to pin down. I go back, was it 5 or 6 years ago? Some young man yelled out. He was on a college campus. I remember there was a co-ed walking, and he yelled out something like, "Hey, you're a fat cow," or something like that, and they kicked him out. They expelled him.
I would have too, just on general principle.
Well, yeah, but the point is, you know, I've been called much worse than that.
As a Mormon,
just as you know, growing up, you know, on the playground, you know, around the house, that kind of stuff, and so we have to develop a little bit of a thick skin when it comes to that. And does everything rise to the occasion of saying, we're kicking you out because you said that? Okay, yeah, he was wrong. Maybe we need to have a little teaching moment here about some of the things you say and why it's not polite to say that kind of stuff. But do we all of a sudden take it to the extreme and brand this kid as some, you know, felon or kick him out of school because he said something like that? And he probably regretted it the minute it came out of his mouth.
Don't they also look at the intent of the speaker when they say something like that, though, when they go to like a court case or something?
Yeah, well, the problem is the rules of the rules really don't apply on a college campus. You don't have a jury of your peers. You don't get representation because, you know, when I read about that case, they hauled him in. He wasn't allowed to. His parents weren't allowed to be there. His lawyer wasn't allowed to be there. He was sitting there in front of administration, and it was already decided. There was no argument. There was no real protection of his rights. So I don't know if you can have it both ways. You know, on a college campus, you know, all the rules and the laws get sort of frozen, and we go by what our definition of hate speech is, what our PC term is, you know, when it comes to those particular types of things. So I'm concerned about that. I mean, I'm wondering how far we go to you know, to make this point.
It's not difficult for me to support the restrictions against hate speech. When I think about particularly two groups, blacks and gays, who were beaten up and abused with very little pushback for a long time. And I knew guys, you know, let's go to the Lincoln Bar and beat up some queers. You know, and it was laughable. It was a sort of a fun sport. And I can see where it was difficult to stop that stuff, but you have to start someplace.
Yeah.
And I think that hate speech was probably a pretty good place to start.
You know, one of the concerns I have with, I mean, free speech is, and to me, you have to have it, and you have to be allowed to say these things, you know, obviously with limitations. But one of the queries that you had first, what do we do when the person that is giving the speech is completely wrong? What if they are lying to you? What are the effects of that? What actions can you take against that? And, you know, in our
which includes almost every political speech.
Exactly. If you look at our present political climate, half of what is being said are insults, you know, nasty phrases. I mean, the most recent one, it's just been in the news the last couple of days. Monday night, Stephen Colbert on his show was responding to an interview that John Dickerson of CBS had with President Trump, and I have to admit, I laughed when I heard it because it was, now he did use a vulgar term, which you didn't hear because it was bleeped out. when it was played. So the vulgar term was there, but it did not come across on the network. And for the last 2 days now, I've heard on certain stations that this is horrible. He shouldn't have been allowed to say this. How dare he insult the president? Of course, I think back of some of the insults that President Obama endured for 8 years, and I'm thinking,
and the kickback on that too.
Yeah, and I mean, it's, you know, you can't be in favor of the one and not in the other. I mean, it's
Political cartoons about Abraham Lincoln as an ape in a top hat, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that? I mean, you do have a solution in that case. You can choose not to watch it. You can turn off that station and let the chips fall where they may. Should he be fired for it? He obviously has a very large audience that likes that. And that, again, though, is part of free speech.
But with that, and I agree, I mean, but it can't be a double standard.
No, it cannot
So
be.
when the ESPN ex-athlete makes a comment and it's considered hate speech and he is summarily fired,
Yeah.
nobody ran to his protection. Nobody said, hey, wait a second, you have to understand that he said this in this particular context. He wasn't out there trying to, you know, say something derogatory or hate-filled, you know, comments. But there wasn't. And he was done. It was over with.
The interesting thing, most of those decisions, though, are made on money.
absolutely.
If the
What-
sponsor,
sure.
are the
Sure.
sponsors going to
Yeah.
continue to support this
Right.
show if we keep this
Yeah.
guy on?
Right.
Yeah.
And if they are, they'll keep him. If they aren't, that's when they
You gotta
go.
follow the
And-
money. That's
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing.
Remember
I mean,
Jimmy the Greek?
Sure.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Sure.
And he was he spoke the absolute truth. In fact, the next day he was supported on a Cleveland, what he said was that during slave times, blacks were bred for strength so that they would be better slaves. And he lost his job over that. The next day, the person who was heading up the Black Studies program at Cleveland State was on the radio. He said, that's exactly what's in the textbook that we're teaching. You know, it says that very same thing. But as to your point, it didn't matter to the sponsors. If they thought, somebody thought, you know, it was gonna cost them. But
There's the political aspect too. You know, now there are things like flag burning. That's a political statement, and it's allowed by the Supreme Court. The draft card burners of the Vietnam War, that was not. But that's an act of civil disobedience
No, that
because
was
there
dis-
was a
that-
law in place.
that was destroying a federal document too.
Yeah. But there's a law in place, civil disobedience, and I think if you engage in an act of civil disobedience, which I have from time to time in my career, then you're responsible to face up to the consequences.
Right.
We mentioned bigotry. Ron, you mentioned bigotry. And it's always been one of those things that confuse me. It's kind of selective in its application. I think that, but the most common definition of bigotry that I could find is one who is a bigot is one who is strongly partial to one's own group, which includes an awful lot of people, and that, we'll find it here, and the groups include religion, race, or politics. Now, strongly partial to one's own group and is intolerant of those who differ. Can any of us say we're not a bigot?
No, it's more that you're opposed to someone or you speak disparagingly about someone because of who they are and what they are.
Well,
and what they believe.
that would be your definition of what a bigot does. All right,
And
but
what
a
bigotry
bigot
is that mental stance that
Well, you
I'm
use
against all Jews, I'm against all black people, I don't care who they are.
and you use the word intolerant.
Yeah.
I don't think when you say that aren't
that's not,
all
my,
of
that's
it.
not my word, by the way.
Oh, but I mean it's in there. But I don't think that anyone at this table is intolerant. We have very different views, but we live.
Well, I don't like
that-
anybody very much, but
That's true.
Brothers,
Right back at you. But,
right.
but you know, the whole purpose of
Yeah.
this panel is the fact that you can have differences of opinion and discuss them civilly. And you know, surprise, surprise, you might learn something.
Well, let me ask
by
you a
listening
question,
to the
Patty.
other
How
side.
tolerant are you of our current president?
I think I'm tolerant of him. I don't agree with him, but I'm tolerant of him. I listen to him. I listened to the entire rally in Pennsylvania. I wanted to hear what he had to say.
Yeah.
I think that, in my mind...
You are strange that way.
I know I am.
You actually do listen to people you disagree with.
Yeah, but
You
I think
even
that's
watch Fox News, don't you?
I watched it this morning. Yes, that's all.
But here's what the problem is. Patty no longer belongs to a Democratic Party that believes the things that she believes in. They have left her. They have gone so far to the left that they don't believe and they don't agree with the types of principles that Patty has learned over the years that you listen to people. And sadly, you know, part of the Republican Party has gone so far to the right that they've left other people that have some of those same beliefs. I would like to bring up one last thing, is that not that long ago there was a gentleman that gave $100 to a particular effort in California. I think it was Prop 28 or whatever, something about families and that kind of stuff. And because a particular group, a very radical, sort of militaristic group of LGBT people got a hold of that information because they disclosed, that somehow they found out this information, he was run out of his job because he gave $100. Now that to me is impinging his right. And if Patty gave $100 to Hamas, you know, through some front organization, have at it. I don't think she needs to.
That is showing intolerance. Does
that to me is intolerance.
Does that make the LGBT people
tolerant?
Tolerant?
You know, I would say no.
Actually, in a lot of cases.
Yeah. You know, someone gives, and that's all, you know, that's supposed to be private.
You have to be careful who you donate money to.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much. Interesting panel. I'd like to sit here longer and get into a real fight with two of you, but we're not going to do that. Our quote for today: to announce that there must be no criticism of the president, or that we are to stand by the president, right or wrong, is not only unpatriotic and servile, but is morally treasonable to the American public. Theodore Roosevelt. Thank you, Teddy.